Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar, PCI 3.0, What You Need to Know Today. My name is Steve Champy and I'll be your host for today's presentation featuring Imperva's Director of Security Strategy, Barry Shteiman. Even though you will only see your name listed in the WebEx window, we actually have quite a few attendees joining us today, so thank you all for your participation. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items with you. The webinar today is being presented in audio broadcast mode, which means that you'll be able to listen through your computer's speakers. However, if you have any issues with the audio broadcast, if the sound gets choppy or intermittent, you can also dial into the session by clicking the Request Teleconference button located at the bottom of the participant panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you continue to have any issues, please contact us using the Q&A tab, which is also located on the right-hand side of your screen. The session today is being recorded, and a link to the archive recording will be sent out to all of our attendees today. The running time for today's webinar will be approximately 25 to 30 minutes and will include a formal Q&A session at the end of the slides. However, please feel free to submit your questions at any time using that same Q&A tab located on the right. Looking at the agenda for our webinar, in just a few minutes I'm going to pass the presentation to our featured speaker, Barry Shteiman. Barry will start with an overview of the PCI Data Security Standard, or DSS, including how it has evolved since the 1.0 release in 2004 and what the standard's primary goals and objectives are. Next, you will explore what you most need to know about the new 3.0 version of the standard. This includes key dates and deadlines and a rundown of the new requirements that have been added to the standard. Barry will conclude with some insight into the parts of PCI that most impact your web applications before we open it up to your questions in the aforementioned Q&A segment. Before we begin, I want to say a few words about today's speaker. Barry Shteiman is the Director of Security Strategy at Imperva, where he works directly with the Office of the CTO on an array of strategic security research projects. He's also authored a number of application security tools, including Hulk, and regularly contributes code to several open source web security projects. Barry can be reached via Twitter at his handle, @bshteiman. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Barry.
Thanks, Steve, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well. So as PCI 3.0 is being released probably today, and it's been announced for quite a while, we decided to go and cover the main changes and the main themes that PCI 3.0 introduces, especially because the last iteration of PCI was almost 3 years ago. So today is a great date for a lot of people. It's Twitter's IPO and it's PCI 3.0. Why not? Let's walk a little bit around what the PCI DSS is and how it's evolved. So PCI DSS is basically I lost the word here, and forgive me for not being born American. It's an industry standard to how do I secure my organization if I need to hold cardholder information of any sort of major credit card company. So if I am a small mom and dad shop, or I'm an Amazon, or any big store, or it's either a retailer, e-tailer, banker, insurance company, anyone that will trade or will hold personal information that's around payment cards needs to work under this regulation. The regulation itself is industry-driven, so it's interesting to see a lot of companies are influencing that specific regulation. Some of the things that you see is vendor recommendations that come into mitigating specific threats. Some of it is around how do I protect a specific asset. And then there are the credit card companies that say these are the best practices that we see, and the whole committee is built around that. I specifically really like the way that PCI is structured, mainly because it names the threats. Unlike if you look at Sarbanes-Oxley and other regulations, which are important, PCI is very down to earth. It has real recommendations that people can actually follow. It's not very threatening, and it's not. I'm not saying it's easy to follow, but it's fairly accurate and it's fairly down to earth in terms of what are the threats, which threats do I need to take care of, what are the real recommendations, real life recommendations, and it makes life really easy for companies to be compliant. If I look into the way that PCI has evolved, over the last 7 years, PCI has evolved tremendously. It started off as a really, really small engine for protecting credit card information. It always had the 12 major categories on what you need to do, but as it evolved, it became more and more clarified and changed from a let's mitigate a threat into let's mitigate a risk. So a threat will be anything that a SQL injection is a threat to a web application, but the risk of being breached is includes SQL injection and other attacks, and it kind of covers a bigger scope. So PCI has moved into being a bit more vague there, but includes a lot more information. The main drivers that were issued with PCI DSS version 3 were, first of all, lack of education and awareness. So some of the research papers that can be found online, one of them is the Verizon Data Breach Report, show that a lot of the organizations that get breached are breached just because they don't know of the risks. So there was a lot of effort put into the version 3 PCI DSS into actually naming the threat, explaining what the threat is, being very concise, and having explanatory documents that scope what the problems are. The passwords and authentication problem, as more sites are being breached through the login engines, more applications are being breached through the login engines, etc., session management becomes a problem. And as you can imagine, the scope of PCI now covers that as well. I think I skipped a slide by mistake. Sorry. So this year, Imperva specifically discovered that a lot, the third-party application or service disruption to the bigger companies' security. For example, the Yahoo breach that happened this year, that happened through a third-party service, and that got breached despite Yahoo's security policies. We covered that in January, I believe, with our HIR report. It kind of shows a trend in companies that need to secure not only themselves, but they need to secure themselves from services that they obtain. Service providers, on the other hand of that scope, now need in PCI 3 now need to inform their customers that they hold best practices on PCI for their customers. That's actually one of the major changes in PCI 3, the accountability for service providers. We'll go through that in a second. There are some main themes to this change. I would like to say that the one that I saw the most drastic, the two ones that I saw most drastic were the focus on skimmers, and I'll explain that in a second. And the second one was, as I said earlier, the service provider accountability in order to prevent third-party breaches from services, and to make sure that if I'm obtaining a service from a big service provider, and that service provider may be providing me with my e-shopping mechanism, then they are obligated to provide all of the required controls and efforts in order to make sure that their environment is PCI compliant for me. So that's a new thing. Now, regarding skimmers, so we've seen a lot of changes over the last couple of years in terms of how hackers and how crime organizations are trying to get to your bank accounts and to your personal data. And one of the main things that happened were people became more aware of the point of sale devices. So that device that the waiter comes to you at your table and swipes your card, or the ATM that you use to get your money out, or even the cash register at the clothing store, all of these devices are susceptible to either theft, manipulation, or alteration. And that taken into account, PCI now includes controls or recommendations into what companies should do to protect themselves against skimmer attacks. So just to give some information regarding why skimmers became so big, this is just a snapshot from the latest Verizon report, the latest Verizon Data Breach Report, where you can clearly see that a big majority of the breach incidents happen from tampering to devices. Now, let me give you an example of what will be tampering. First of all, it can be just a simple skimmer that a waiter that takes your credit card after you finished a meal and just swipes it on a stolen device and steals some money to himself. It can be a taxi driver that swipes in any case, it can be a fake keyboard installed on a ATM device, or it can be a device between the cash register and the modem that connected back to the clearinghouse, just stealing some information on the way. All of these are considered tamper of the transaction, and they are the majority of the breaches over the last year. That's actually really concerning. So PCI definitely decided to address that. And regarding third-party, so I didn't want to cover third-party breaches that much because it's been a theme for us over the past year. But some of the interesting ones was BOFA, Bank of America, that has been breached via a third-party provider that got hacked over the last year. I believe this was around March or February, where one of the companies that provide data analytics for Bank of America, obviously Bank of America gives them their data in order to run analytics on, and the third party got breached, and therefore data got stolen. So that's an example of a risk that wasn't taken into account in the past, and now needs to be taken into account either by enforcing policies or legal terms on the companies that you work with. Let's talk a little bit about deadlines. So the PCI DSS 3.0 comes out today, as far as we know. I haven't looked if they already published the standard as standard, but at least yesterday it was mentioned that today it becomes effective. Companies need to start working on compliance on January 1st. So January 1st is when everyone needs to finish drafting all of the QSAs and auditors need to finish planning for the companies that they plan to bring to PCI 3.0, and bear in mind that PCI 2.0 still remains active until the end of the year. Now, not all of the requirements are effective immediately for January 1st, because some of them require a lot of investment from companies. So the PCI Council gave a deadline of June 30, 2015, to comply with the 6 new requirements within PCI DSS. So what I chose to do today to make life easier is to explain the new 6 requirements and see where we can get from there. So let's move on through the different sections. So I did mark the points in terms of which point is which. So every new requirement has its own line item within the PCI DSS. I chose to give you that number in case you want to copy it off, if it interests you later on to have some research on it. So 6.6 talks about basically security of data in memory. What that means is it addresses the threat of once a user runs a transaction or enters any personal information into a computer, there's a point in time where that information is kept on the computer's memory. When I send my credentials, when I log into my bank account, that data goes into the bank server memory for at least a few minutes, and to be honest, the client's memory as well. And there are types of malware that are able to scrape that off and steal that kind of information. So PCI wants you to now address that as well. I believe that this will introduce a lot of code changes and a lot of new frameworks in terms of how do we handle data in memory. Do we do on-the-fly encryption? There are a lot of questions around this, and that's why there's such a major time gap before this gets enforced. For now, in order to achieve compliance, all you have to do is, well, you have to find a way to secure that kind of information, but in order to achieve compliance beyond security, all you have to do is to document within your security process how is the personal card information is and the personal authentication information is being secured when it transmits through memory. So for now, the process is all about minimizing exposure and writing the compensating document that says we understand how this is being achieved in our organization. The second one is talking about session management and broken authentication. We've seen that a lot in the wild, where a lot of websites are either susceptible to brute force or session hijacking or cookie tampering, and that's just on the website. Obviously, there's a lot in internal applications, etc. But what it really means is the ability of users to reuse IDs in order to steal information. If I'm a user now and I log into my bank account and someone can tap into my browser or hijack my browser, or a malware piece can steal my session and transmit it to another user, and that can be replayed, essentially what this means is that someone can piggyback on my own session to the bank and get into my bank account. That's just one very simplistic example. So now PCI wants you to address that. There are several ways to address it, and I will actually cover this as one of the two things that WAF, Web Application Firewall, addresses at the end of the presentation. But what you should do, and I put it here, the recommendations of what companies should do. First of all, you need to understand which tokens within sessions are session tokens. So what's a user ID? What's a session ID? And if you're an application developer or you own the application development department, you should know what that means. Every time that a user logs in, the server holds a session in that user's behalf in order to transact information between user and client. That information now needs to be flagged just so you know that a session exists. Second, don't expose session ID in URL. It's very common for users to, I will call it deprecated mechanisms such as the previous JSession ID, that used to just include the session identifier within the URL of an application. And then sometimes just a simple copy-paste of the application will let you piggyback on that session, as I said earlier. So one of the main requirements is just remove that from the URL. It's very simple. One of the main things that are done are just moving into a server state parameter or to an encrypted header of some sorts, but remove it from the most obvious area, which is the session, which can be scraped easily by any available tool. Implement timeouts. So it sounds funny, but a lot of companies allow sessions to stay on forever. Once you log into the application, you can stay on for the whole day. So now PCI is telling you, no, that needs to stop. You need to make sure, and they don't tell you how long it should stay. You may as well say, I want users to stay on my system for 1 day. But they do tell you you have to control that. And the last thing, make sure that user IDs within your system cannot be altered. So 8.5.1. This is the first requirement that talks about service providers, and this is an interesting one. Basically, what it means is that if I'm a service provider and I provide service, and whichever service to my customers, which includes PCI relevant information, what I need to do is I need to ensure that I separate credentials between customers. For example, if I am a service provider for fixing your desktops, and I have access to customer A and customer B, I'm obligated to both customers that my login is different for both of my customers. So if someone breaches to customer A, they cannot go to customer B. If someone breaches to me and steals credentials on customer B, they cannot go to customer A. And that's one of the mandates in terms of both authentication and credential management when it comes to service providers. So service providers are now accountable to make sure that they keep best practices towards their customers. Bear in mind, this is a new compliance issue, so that again needs to be only addressed by June 30, 2015. But I assume that most companies will already start doing it much earlier than that, because that's not a very hard requirement to follow. Another new one, requirement 9.9, so protecting the point of sale devices. As we said earlier, this is to protect against skimmers. Skimmers are now a very big part of PCI, understanding that problem with the middleman between the business and the clearinghouse is becoming a really big issue. So in order to be compliant and make sure that, well, compliant is the first thing, but also trying to make sure that you're securing your environment as well as you can, your company as well as you can, here are the recommendations. A, you need to make sure that you own a list of point-of-sale devices within your company, and you need to make sure that on a periodic period, you are checking that they haven't been tampered with or stolen. So the device that you have is the real device. Some of the easy examples are putting a void if removed stickers on devices to make sure that nothing has been altered in them in terms of hardware, making sure that the device serial numbers match what you know, making sure that no one can access those devices. And again, training for awareness becomes a really big issue. So I would say that this is also a part where PCI lacks a little bit, and I'll explain that. Training for me means that I educate my users to make sure that they are aware of the problem, so they are conscious that this might happen, and they know how to act. That's the easy stuff, and that's what PCI addresses. What I feel that is missing right now is also making sure that this is enforced on HR within the company. So I need to do some more due diligence, and that's training to HR, making sure that the people that I own have clean records. Again, most companies do that, but it's not in the regulation at this point, because unfortunately, a lot of the times the skimmers that we talked about are your employees. They are an inside threat in many of the cases. And HR is the first door in order to control this problem. So penetration testing has changed a little bit. In the new section 11.3, the PCI Council decided that from now on, penetration testing is not, well, it was a big section in the past, but now they've added a lot of new requirements here. The one that I decided to note here is making sure that you are compliant based on the standard that is relevant to the system. I used NIST here, but it can be any specific compliance, pen test compliance list. For example, if it's a web application, OWASP is a good list to work on. The SANS list is another one. You can choose your own, so they don't restrict you in terms of which one to use, but you have to choose a standard. So this is the way that PCI delegates knowledge, knowing that the council doesn't know everything, and there are people that are professionals in the penetration testing industry, and they should rely on them for that. So I'll give you an example. When OWASP 2013 came out, some changes were introduced. In order to remain compliant, you have to adapt to OWASP 2013. 2014, when the OWASP list will come out, you'll have to adapt to that in order to be compliant. And yes, there's some work there, but it's worth it, because the OWASP list is, and again, OWASP is just an example, the OWASP list always goes after what are the hottest threats being used by hackers at this point, and how do we define them for customers. Okay, 12.9, again, a new one, talking about service providers. This one is quite simple for service providers to achieve in terms of how do they prove compliance, but it requires an internal change within the standard. So what it requires from companies, from service providers, is to provide templates and documents that they are signing against their customers, and they're telling them we withhold the responsibility to maintain the PCI DSS standard for you. So if you are my customer and you share and you run on my system something that requires PCI, I am in charge of making sure that you are compliant, and I'm taking the responsibility in case that you are not. That's a big change, because that means that service providers now are, and I don't want to go to the legal side because I'm not an expert there, but it basically means that the service providers are accountable for penalties as well, as far as I can understand the regulation. Because if I need to provide you with the tools to be compliant, and I'm taking the audit for you, then I'm taking the penalty for you as well. Now, 2 out of the 6 new requirements that I just mentioned are something that is within our field, specifically in the WAF field. Sorry, that's been wrong button, and I shall pay for that. So the pen test and the session management are 2 new things that you can address on your web applications with a WAF. Now, I'm not a product guy within our company, but I do feel the obligation to tell you that there are ways to deal with it with current investment of what you already have from us or from other WAF vendors. It doesn't matter. First of all, broken authentication and session management. So this thing can be addressed really easily with the web application firewall, because the web application firewall is content aware and is session and application aware. So there is the notion of how do I make sure that the session is sticky and secure between the user and the client. There are some fraud, anti-fraud companies in that space as well that should help you. And obviously the best solution will be a marriage between both. But what happens is you can map the threats within the authentication and session management world into several attacks. And I mentioned most of them here. If you can make sure that you are securing those or compensating for those risks in any form of a way, then you can achieve compliance. That's why a web application firewall in this case already solves that specific part of the problem. The second one is the penetration testing. So one of the things, and here it's not necessarily a WAF or Imperva WAF or anything like that, but some of the issues that come from penetration testing is the patching. The remediation part becomes a real hassle for companies, because you have big applications, really big environments, multi-version, multi-tenant. It just becomes really unmanageable. And for that kind of thing, a lot of companies have come and grown. Companies like White Hat, Qualys, other companies that just provide the scanner, if you will, but not just the scanner, a mechanism that runs automatic pen testing on your environment from remote or from a local posture. So I know IBM and HP and others have a suite that you can buy and run these kind of scans on your system. But what we provide to this thing is the ability to virtually patch these problems. So you're running through the pen test and you want to run it against a standard as 11.3 dictates. I need to find NIST vulnerabilities, and I need to find problems that are in the OWASP scope. Once the scanner finds these things, that's first step. Then you need to remediate the problems. So what we bring to the table, and I know that some of the other WAFs in the market have adapted to this kind of technology now, is the ability to absorb results out of a scanner or out of a consultancy package and virtually patch the application for you. So yes, you still have to patch the system at some point, but you're protected from now on, and it is considered a risk management, a mitigated risk item. So you can achieve compliance with this way, making the problem just a little bit smaller. I've included in the presentation just the white paper that as you can see on the link below, that talks about our integration with White Hat. Again, it's not to push a product, it's more to show how this kind of a process comes in. And I know you guys get the presentation later on. I do encourage you to read this, because it will explain a lot of how can I take this specific chapter off my problem list. Later on, we do have the PCI compliance portal within our website for a long time now. I think we have it ever since PCI 1.2, but we keep updating it. And right now, what you should do is, if you go to our website, you can find a lot of information on how to keep yourself secure, not necessarily on what we do. We try to keep the information as generic as possible. If you go to imperva.com/PCI, you'll see the other sections that are not new and how you protect against those. Some of them do require some sort of technical solution. Some of them just have the layman terms explanation from us on this is what this actually means, and this is how you should address it. All of the sections, I marked here all of the sections that we used to, before PCI 3.0 added some stuff on our table. These are the specific sections that are handled by a web application firewall, and all of that information is available as well. So at the end, let's talk about where you can learn just a little bit more information about the new changes and PCI in general, and the other content we talked about here today. First of all, the PCI DSS Council website includes a lot of documentations. It includes the regulation itself. It includes Q&A documents that explains what are the problems, how do I solve them. They're not in a very simplistic language most of the times. That's why we felt the need to do this webinar. But they have a lot of information there that should help you getting started. We have, again, like I said in the previous slide, we have our PCI Resource Center that you can always come and you can ask us any question you want. I chose to mention Krebs on security here for one specific reason. Because one of the big themes this year within PCI is skimmers, I feel like Brian Krebs in Krebs on Security has a lot of information there. There's a whole section on his website that includes different skimmer attacks and different incidents, and it kind of gives you a lot of education on how the problem looks like and gives you sort of an idea what should you do about that. And at the end, let's go to our research. I mentioned earlier that the Yahoo breach from January. There's a research paper in our resources site coming from our ADC center, and the other one, which is the CMS hacking webinar that we did a few months ago, that includes a lot of information on how third-party applications are breached and how it affects the using organization or the company that uses that third-party software. Since this is a theme, educate yourself, dork yourself about this kind of information, so later on you're able to understand what you should do about that. And with that, I'll thank you guys, and I'll give you back to Steve.
Great. Thank you, Barry. Very, very informative presentation there. We thank you for it. Before we go to Q&A, which we are going to do in a minute, I want to talk to you about some additional materials related to today's webinar. As I mentioned in the chat window, the webinar today was recorded, and a link to that archive recording will be made available along with a PDF copy of all the slides to all attendees today. And the vehicle for that availability will be Imperva's LinkedIn group, which is called Imperva Data Security Direct. And we will post those webinar follow-up materials on Data Security Direct and send all of our attendees a direct link to access that group, where you can get not only today's webinar materials, but also other past webinars that we've done on basically a monthly basis. So please look for that in the next 24 hours or so. I know that from a time perspective, we were trying to keep this around 30 minutes, and we're probably just past that, but I do want to get to some questions that have come in, and please feel free to also submit additional questions through the Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. I will be respectful of people's times, but let's at least get a couple of questions that have come in. So, Barry, the first question we had asks, for your opinion on what do you think is currently missing in PCI?
Well, cool question. The first thing that I think is missing is at least a discussion on how the HR department of the company needs to look into the employees that they hire. It's self-explanatory in many of the cases, and there are mentions to this, but I really think that there should be a proof within a compliance process that says, yes, I am as a company, and this is my HR department, we are responsible in making sure that we do background checks for employees that are handling credit cards. Usually if you go to a restaurant, for example, I mean, restaurants are using if you take a big restaurant chain, they have thousands of waiters, and they can all clear your credit cards, and those can be skimmers. So the only, although it might be expensive for companies, they should run some sort of a background check just to make sure that these employees have a clear background, or to their best of knowledge, those employees have a clear history. I know it's hard when it's teenagers sometimes, but at least the effort needs to be done. And when you can't get information, you can get information. The other part here that is really, really missing for me is DDoS. Now, I know this is weird to say because we're looking at payment cards, etc. But DDoS is a major issue for the financial industry and for companies that are dealing with credit card information. Imagine what happens if a bank's trading system gets DDoSed, and you're now trying to pay for something, or let's take the other angle, when DDoS is used in order to make sure that the security folks that are sitting in the bank's security operations center are looking at the monitor and are overwhelmed by a traffic load or some sort of another form of DDoS attack, and therefore they're not looking at the fact that someone is now looking and trying to run a SQL injection on their trading application. So I believe that this is a missing piece within the PCI DSS right now. I am sending my recommendations to the council to make sure that they at least take it into consideration for the next time or for the next amendments, because I feel that this is a major issue for companies in general. And yeah, I hope I answered the question as best as I could.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you. Let's see. Well, let's do one or two more questions again. I know we're past our self-imposed deadline. Barry, here's a question that comes in. I think you might be able to comment on about MSP liability.
Yeah.
It says many MSPs already advertise to customers that they are PCI compliant. What do you think MSPs need to change to reflect their new liability under PCI 3.0?
That's actually a great question because it reflects really to the minor changes in PCI. So far, companies, MSPs are telling you we are PCI certified. The problem is that doesn't serve you in any form of way. PCI certified means nothing for a customer of a company, other than the fact that you know that the company you use is keeping efforts in order to secure themselves or your information based on what they need. The changes now are, instead of just telling you that an MSP telling you I am compliant, when you are their customer, they're obligated to you to tell you not only I am compliant, but I'm compliant for you, which means when you submit your information or when you use my system, I am responsible for making sure that part of my system is compliant for you. So I'm taking the PCI responsibility for you, which means if for example, if you're using an e-store on a service provider that tells you it's PCI compliant, two things need to happen. A, that MSP needs to be providing you with a legal document that says that he is now making sure that you're compliant through his system, but also, and that again, that's the part that I'm not sure, he's accountable. So if I keep saying he, but if that company gets breached, they pay the penalty as if you were breached. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, great. Let's do one more question. There are several here, and we obviously won't have time to get to all of them, but we will provide answers offline for those questions we don't get to today. Barry, next question we'll do. How about, I don't know if you have the answer to this, maybe a question for a QSA, but how long do we have to conclude a current PCI 2.0 audit?
So the PCI 2.0 audit is relevant until the end of this year. meaning that, as I mentioned earlier in the slides, it's relevant until December 30th, 2013. Starting January 2014, January 1st, the regulation is already 3.0. That's also why the PCI Council has issued the paper as draft a long time ago, saying these are the changes that are coming. So starting 2014, you need to start, when you work on your next audit, you already need to work on your audit for 3.0, with an exception to the 6 new subjects that I just mentioned here, which are only enforced starting June 30th, 2015.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's end it there. Let me thank you, Barry, very much for the presentation, and let me thank all the attendees who joined us today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar with Imperva. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.